Good day. Today I'm going to be discussing chapter 6 of React Hooks, building forms with hooks. So in this chapter we looked at how to implement forms with validation logic. So handling forms with validation while using hooks, and mainly with emails and password inputs in the form. So let's see how that's done in the code. So firstly we have main.jsx, which is where we launch the application. In the app.js we attach user form components in our div, and this is our user form component using hooks. So firstly we import useState, which is this hook that helps us change the state of our data. So we have our function component user form, and within it we have this first hook which has email as a variable. And basically email, the current state of email is an empty string which is set here by useState. Then we have the set email function or deconstructor. What this does is basically changes the state of the data in the variable to whatever the user inputs in the form. So when the user begins to type in the form, you can see here the state of the data is currently changing, as you can see. That's because email holds the state of the data, which is currently an empty string, and as we input characters into the input field on the form, set email basically changes the state of that data to whatever we're placing in the in this placeholder over here. Then same thing with password. This password variable holds the current state of the data, which is an empty string. Then set password function is triggered as soon as we start to input data in our placeholder over here. Then the state of that data changes, as you can see, because of set password deconstructor changing the state of the data or the password. That's how these work. And when you go further down here, we can see here email entered and the state of the data for email passed there, and then password entered and then the state of password over there, which are these being changed and manipulated when we input the data. Then we have our function here, handle submit. Within it is an arrow function with a validation process that takes place here, including if statements to validate the email and the password. So handle submit is for when we're submitting the form, so filling in details and submitting the form. It handles the submission of the form. So in this arrow function we have here variable email, and it uses form data.get to get the email, and same thing with the password. Then this is where the validation for the email takes place. So firstly we have a variable email valid, which is set to false. So currently the validation of the email is false. So firstly, you have the if statement, which basically saying that if there is no email, or if the email.length is equal to 0, so if there is 0 characters for the email in the form, then it will show this error, email is required. So basically, when it's empty and there's no email, we click submit, then this pops up over there. Then this else if is checking if the length of the email is less than 6 characters, and if it is, then it will say the email should be a minimum of 6 characters. So it will show this error. Then this else if statement is to handle the error for an email containing spaces. So yeah. Then we have this else block which has an empty string and email valid set to true. So this basically has the state of the email error and then the email valid set to true. So that's how the validation for the email is handled. Then in the if statement is basically saying if the email is valid, then an alert will pop up here showing the email and the password in the front end. Yeah. So basically when we put in the correct valid details and we click submit, then it will give us this alert over here that shows that the email is valid. Then we have, I went ahead to create a validation for the password, pretty much the same procedure as this validation for the email. So yeah, checking if there's a password entered, checking the amount of characters in the password, and I added this alert over here saying password too short, must be a minimum of 10 characters. Because here in this if statement I created, I'm saying else if password.length is less than or equal to 10, meaning if the characters in the password is less than or equal to 10, that means the password is too short. So if I make the password too short, then basically it will log this error. This alert will pop up, password too short, because I attached it in this alert. So that's the validation for the email and the password. Then we have here our return, which is the form itself. So we have form action attached here to the action. So basically, yeah, so when we look here at this hook over here, we have the current state of the data stored in here. Then form action will change the state of the data, right? So that state, this variable is basically holding the handle submit function, right? Which is basically this whole validation process. So what basically happens is when the user clicks submit, right, and the pop-up comes up, the alert, then this if statement is basically triggered, showing the password. I mean showing the alert, showing the email and the password. So yeah, use action state is basically yeah, it's similar to use state, but it's specifically for actions taking place when we input data in the form and submit. Then yeah, this is basically the form. As you can see here, when we basically inputting data in the form, right? So placing our email here, you can see the state of the data changing. As I mentioned, the set email function, which is set here, is changing the state of this data. So that is immediately triggered when we change or when we add values within the data, and those values are created by set email, which is over here, eTarget.value. And then the same with the password over here. So yeah, that's basically the whole summary of the user form in chapter 6, mainly using hooks and states to change the data and validate the password and the email.